All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into this incredible ancient story from the book of Samuel that honestly feels like it could have been written yesterday. It's really a timeless look at what happens when institutions start to crumble, how leadership transitions happen, and what a truly profound, world-changing call actually sounds like. And here's the twist. It doesn't come from the top, from a position of power. It comes from the quietest corner of a system that's failing.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to step into a nation that's going through a serious spiritual crisis. Then, we'll zoom in on this one really powerful symbol of hope that just refuses to go out. From there, we'll get into the mechanics of a call that changes absolutely everything and feel the weight of the tough message it brings. And finally, we'll see how this one quiet moment completely reshapes the future of an entire nation.
So let's set the scene. We're starting in an age that's really defined by what it's missing. This was a time of deep, deep rot in its institutions, in its morality. It felt like the lines of communication to the divine had just gone dead. Now this line right here, it's not just some historical fact. It's a diagnosis of a sick society. The sources tell us that this divine silence was actually a form of judgment. It makes sense, right? When the people in charge lose their moral compass, what do you get? You get chaos. Guidance dries up, nobody has a clear vision, and the whole nation is just adrift.
So what do we even call an environment like this? Let's give it a name. A spiritual winter. It's that season that happens when the established order, the very institutions that are supposed to give you clarity and stability, are failing themselves. And what's left is just this massive vacuum of leadership and purpose.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see this whole crisis perfectly in these two people. On one side, you've got Eli. He's the high priest, the top dog, the ultimate spiritual and legal authority. But he's 98 years old, he's physically blind, and, this is the important part, he's spiritually deaf. He represents this old, decaying system that's just collapsing under its own weight. And then you have Samuel, a kid, an assistant with zero power, zero status, but he's obedient and he's spiritually awake. He represents a future that's still a complete blank slate.
But even in this spiritual winter, in all of this darkness, the story gives us this one powerful image of hope. It's just a tiny, flickering point of light that's telling us, hey, it's not over yet. This line is just brilliant because it's working on two levels at once. So, we're in the tabernacle, right? The center of worship where God's presence was believed to be. Now, literally, this line is just telling us the time. It's right before dawn, the darkest part of the night. But, metaphorically, whoa, it's this huge statement about the entire nation. The light of God's presence, yeah, it's dim, but it hasn't been snuffed out completely.
So this lamp becomes so much more than just a lamp. It's a sign that this long, dark night of judgment is almost over. It's a symbol of this stubborn kind of grace, this promise that even when our institutions fail completely, a new day is on the way. It's basically foreshadowing the end of Eli's time, which is running on fumes, and the dawn of Samuel's.
Okay, so the stage is perfectly set. We're in a dark temple, it's just before dawn, and now the action starts. And this isn't some big flashy story about a thunderclap from heaven. No, this is about the quiet, kind of confusing and repetitive process of learning to recognize a voice you've never ever heard before.
God calls Samuel's name. Samuel, thinking it's his boss, gets up and runs to Eli. This happens 3 times. And that repetition is so important. It shows you just how obedient Samuel is to the only authority he knows, but it also shows you how spiritually clueless Eli has become. And here's what's so fascinating. God is completely bypassing the broken chain of command, but he still uses the broken leader, Eli, to teach the new one how to actually listen. So finally, after the 3rd time, the light bulb goes on for Eli, and he figures out what's happening. He gives Samuel these simple words, and they change everything. Speak, for your servant is listening. With that one little phrase, Samuel's whole job description changes. He goes from being a kid doing chores in a temple to a prophet who's ready to receive a mission. This isn't just about hearing anymore. It's about a total surrender. It's the start of something personal and direct. Okay, so now Samuel is ready to listen. You'd think his first assignment would be something encouraging, right? Something easy to get him started? Nope. He gets handed a message of absolutely devastating, world-altering judgment. I mean, just think about that imagery for a second. A message so shocking, so intense, that it creates a physical sensation, a ringing in your ears. This was it. This was the final, non-negotiable verdict against Eli and his corrupt family, the highest spiritual authority in the entire country. The system was about to get torn down, and this little boy was the one who had to deliver the news. And the judgment was so absolute because the sin wasn't just a mistake, it was systemic. Eli had put his corrupt sons above God, and he did nothing to stop their evil. The corruption was so deep that the very system of atonement, the sacrifices and offerings meant to make things right, couldn't fix it anymore. The institution designed to bring forgiveness was itself beyond forgiveness. So the next morning, Samuel is terrified, but he's obedient. He tells Eli the terrible news. And because he was faithful, because he spoke that incredibly hard truth, his own words started to have divine authority. This phrase that none of his words fall to the ground, it means his words had weight. They landed, they had impact, they actually changed things. He became this trusted channel for truth in an age full of lies. Now, this moment doesn't just change Samuel's life. It becomes a massive pivot point for the entire nation. This one personal call is about to set off a complete national transformation. You see, Samuel becomes this crucial bridge. He basically ends the era of the judges, which was just total anarchy. The book says everyone did as they saw fit. His calling marks the end of the line for the old hereditary priesthood and the birth of a new source of guidance, the prophet. Through him, God's word comes back to the center of the nation's life. And he's the one who anoints the first two kings, kicking off a whole new political era. So when you pull back and look at the whole thing, the modern parallels are kind of stunning. When our big institutions start to rot, it's usually not about bad policy. It starts with a moral failure at the top. Real game-changing disruption, it almost never comes from the C-suite. It comes from the margins, from the people nobody's paying attention to. Truly listening isn't just a passive thing. It's an act of courage that forces you to do something. And a new chapter in history doesn't start with a memo. It starts when one person is brave enough to speak a truth that really matters. And that's really the thought we'll end on. The story of Samuel starts in a world where God's voice was rare, drowned out by corruption and chaos. Our world isn't silent. It's deafeningly loud. So the question for us, I think, is how do we cut through all that noise to recognize the truth that actually matters? And maybe more importantly, what are we going to do when we find it?